Let's see if I, oops,
Oh,
oops, oops.
actually, I've just started it. I'm good.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Good. Thank you.
I'm sorry
I was
about
going to
that.
say,
I apologize.
no problem. See, listening can be interactive.
That was one thing we didn't account for, that's for sure.
Yes. So here are some other ways that listening makes us more human. And first of all, that is that listening is volitional. It's a conscious choice. We choose to listen. So we, think about what is in the past, in the future, and we make a choice to listen. And by doing that, we show not only what we value, what we're interested in, we show what we respect, and we show shared power by doing that. And we can put our own needs aside, our own needs and wants, and we can put the emphasis on the other person. And I think that's one of the real benefits of listening, that it directly shows the other person that we are placing a value on them and an interest, and we're sharing the power and giving them respect. So that has kind of a good and bad effect, in the sense that if you're choosing to listen, the speaker is happy. If you're choosing not to listen, may not have such a good outcome, certainly for the relationship, and sometimes maybe for your job, or, some other impact. And definitely listening makes use of that metacognition and that interactive aspect, so that we can think about the past and plan for the future and change our behaviors, what we're saying as we're listening, or what we're doing as we're listening, so that we have that connection, and so that we can reach the outcomes that we want. And it's a more conscious choice that we're doing that. So then I thought, excuse me, one last thing about how are some of the differences, and that is that listening involves more senses than just the ears. In ILA, we've talked about this quite a bit, that there's more to listening than just your ears. So definitely it involves your sense of vision. You see the other person, you're reading their body language, their facial expression, and so on. But what you might not know is that listening also involves the sense of smell. So whatever you're thinking causes your body to secrete different chemicals, different hormones, etc., into your bloodstream, which causes you to give off a different scent because of what you're thinking. So the person who's in the room with you picks up that scent and reacts to it, and whatever their brain is thinking now causes them to secrete chemicals, which again give off a different scent. And so there's actually some conversation about that, when you meet somebody and you fall madly in love with them right away, it's not really love at first sight, it's love at first whiff, because you're both giving off a scent that is attractive to the other person. In addition, when you're attracted to someone else, your pupils dilate. And so we get a couple of different signals when we're with the person. So see, you wouldn't be seeing these if you were texting or emailing or on the phone without the video. So when we are there with the person, we get all of these other inputs from listening. So breathing the same air also enables empathy, because we can look into the person's eyes and see to a certain extent what they're thinking, and it creates that connection with that other person. So not only does listening help create a bond and a trust and a commitment, but we are more likely to create a bond, a trust, and a commitment when that voice is there, when we have the voice associated with what's being said. So we are more likely to trust someone when we hear their voice. And that's sometimes why it is that we don't know why we don't trust somebody, we just don't trust them. It might be a combination of that scent, body language, what they're saying, and so on. But you see, you wouldn't get those other inputs if you were texting or emailing or using some other means of communication. It also helps us to develop and share this empathy. And empathy is one of the things that I think is a really important piece of listening, because when you are with someone and you see the pain in their eyes or the joy in their eyes, and then you respond to that, not only are you responding with your body language, but again, you're responding with all of those. You experience the same emotion. When you're truly empathic, you experience the same emotion as the other person. And so your body has secreted those same emotion, those same chemicals, whether it's adrenaline or pheromones or whatever, you're sharing that same experience. And so that promotes compassion. And we know that people who are in the helping professions oftentimes experience what we call compassion fatigue, because they're experiencing that connection with the other person and going through the same feelings. at the end of the day, they have been on an emotional roller coaster because they've been experiencing all of these feelings, whether it's a nurse who is dealing with people who are in pain or suffering, or a counselor, or people in the helping profession sometimes experience that compassion fatigue. So here, basically, kind of a summary, the ways that listening makes us more human. It uses more senses than the other forms of communication, uses more cognitive processes, more neurological, physical, and emotional processes. We even have what are called mirror neurons in the brain, that when you're with someone and you see them perform an action, it stimulates the parts of your brain that would experience that same action even though you're not experiencing it. And there's a lot of new research being done because we think that that may also be a source of some of the empathy. But you see, if you're not there with the person to see that and to get all the input from these other sources, it's just we're not making use of all of our humanity. Definitely listening creates a connection with the sender, and again, it allows us to feel and show empathy, and I'm going to talk more about that later because there's definitely an empathy crisis developing. Just a couple last things about how listening makes us more human, because these were kind of surprising. I didn't know these, and I'm guessing that you didn't either, that according to a Swedish study, human heartbeats synchronize when we sing together. How would we know? And yet, again, that kind of gives us a connection. And this next one, hearing your mother's voice can lower your blood pressure. I know maybe it doesn't always lower your blood pressure. It depends on what she's saying to you, whether it lowers your blood pressure or not. She might have the potential of not only raising your blood pressure to an extreme, but also lowering your blood pressure. But those are things I think that we don't even consciously know. And yet with listening, we have been reacting to that. So let's pause for just a minute and see if there are any questions that people have about how does listening make us more human, or how are we human to start with, and then how does listening make us more human? Are there questions?
I have one from David Boderi. David asked, I am intrigued by the mirror neuron idea and hope that Sheila or others can share some research resources with us. Thanks.
And I don't have that at my fingertips. And I know Laura has done some research with the mirror neurons also. That seems to be a fairly new field, and one that they're not quite sure the impact of it. The animals also have those mirror neurons. But anyway, they're just not quite sure of all the impact that it has. But they are now, because of MRIs, et cetera, able to detect that there is activity in the brain in the same areas when you see that action.
Yeah, David, I will get some resources together for you and send them over to you, okay? I know you're saying okay, so okay, we'll do that. And then Rafaela added, I read about some research from the Max Planck Institute about mirror neurons. And Lauren Eppert said, can we slow down just a bit, please? I'm having a hard time keeping up. And David said he appreciates any suggested leads. So thank you.
Okay.
So, are there any other questions? I hear somebody typing. Is that you, Phil?
No, it's not.
No? Okay. Dick Marr says, lately I notice that people speak loudly on their cell phone while staying on a closed space like a bus, airplane, elevator. Sometimes I do not want to listen to personal stuff, but it seems that they do not care. I've definitely experienced that as well.
Yes. Yes. Buenos dias, Dickmar.
Good morning, Sheila.
Good morning. And I think there are not maybe what we would call civility rules yet to address that, because you notice that when you're on the airplane, people immediately get their cell phones out and start carrying on very loud conversations. I think it may just be something that we have to make people aware of, just like we might ask them, tap them on the shoulder and ask them, to excuse us as we go by. Maybe you tap them on the shoulder and ask them to, could they please talk more quietly, or could they mind moving somewhere else. The rules are kind of being rewritten now about what's polite and what's not polite. And I will tell you that it seems to be the younger people who are rewriting the rules.
Oh, that's definitely true, Sheila. And I'd like to point out some research that was conducted by Valakowski, Imhoff, and Worthington that looked at cell phones in 3 or 4 different cultures, and how the perception of cell phone usage in public was very different in different cultures. And they looked at an Asian culture, Finland, and the United States, I believe. So that was Worthington and Valakowski. I know were at least two of the co-authors. Imhoff was on that too.
Okay. And I think as we move forward, especially I'm hoping that as we become more aware of the impact that the use of technology is having on our relationships and outcomes, that we will make stronger rules about when they can be used and how they can be used. So I think we all have the opportunity to have some input with that by how we model the behavior, and if you have children or if you're a teacher, the rules that you establish for the environment. I know businesses, that's something that they are dealing with, because in meetings, when people bring their cell phones and their computers or their notebook pads, et cetera, to them all the time. Some companies are now going to tech-free meetings because of the distraction, and because even if you don't bring yours, you're distracted by somebody else's because you're looking at, oh, they're shopping online while during the meeting, or oh, I should be checking my email, that sort of thing. So I think that we will see some rules being made about that as we go forward.
Sheila, let me just jump in and say that on the chat, we've been getting a number of people saying that they would love to get a list of the resources. So what we'll do is we'll have Sheila and I compile a list of resources after this, and we will email it to every email of everyone who signed up for this webinar. So that will be a way for us to get that all out to you. And just a reminder that this webinar will be posted at the ILA YouTube website. So you'll be able to reference this in the future as well.
Okay. Moving on then. Let's look at how we are communicating today so that we can see how that's impacting how it's impacting listening and also our relationships. So there's some, now I'm going to share some very large numbers with you that some people find just daunting. So the first one is that currently between 183 to 350 billion emails, this is a global number now, are sent every day. Between 183 and 350 billion emails are sent every day. Now, if you compare that to the number of texts, we might think that it's the texts that we're seeing more of, and actually it's still the emails. So there are 23 billion texts being sent every day. See, that's about a tenth the number of texts as emails. And we also know, interestingly enough, that some of the European countries that texting is dropping off, starting in 2014, that they are not using texting as much. Now, it might be that they're using some other form that is somewhat similar, like Instagram or Snapchat or something like that, where it's still a written communication rather than an auditory or spoken communication. But anyway, 23 text messages per day. And then compare that to 12.4 billion phone calls are made per day. So this is kind of how that works. For every phone call that you make per day, you're typically sending 2 texts and 10 emails. So if you're making, if you're making 5 phone calls, then obviously the number goes up. And certainly the numbers are different by countries, and they're also different by age groups. Somewhat different by genders, but mostly by age groups is where we see some of the differences. But we're even seeing in, the 50 and above that they are also going to more text messages than phone calls. Which is kind of surprising because they are the ones that tend to value the face-to-face communication more. And this is just an interesting slide. If you take a look at, this is an internet minute. So look at everything that's happening in one internet minute. So 701,000 Facebook logins, 20.8 million messages on WhatsApp. And then if you go down towards the bottom, the tweets, 347,000 new tweets, posts on LinkedIn, 2.4 million searches on Google. But I think the thing that's interesting with this is notice that none of these involve a voice. Other than, say, the YouTube, none of these involve a voice. And so what this says is that all the times that we're spending doing these things are times that we are not having those conversations, whether it's over the phone or face-to-face. And so what we see is just a significant decline in the amount of talking and listening that we are doing. And we're going to look at what the impact that has. This one, I think, will maybe surprise you. Studies show that an office worker is distracted electronically every 3 minutes, and that it takes an average of 23 minutes to get back on track. So you're reading your email and the phone rings and you take the phone call, and then it takes you 23 minutes to get back to where you were in the email, thinking about what do I need to say? What else does that mean I need to do? What do I have to put on my calendar? And then all of a sudden the phone rings again and you're, back to not knowing where to put your attention. And so I have also seen studies that show that 30% of your day is wasted switching from one activity to another, from one form of communication to another. 30%. And I think that's astounding to think that we're spending so much time just going back and forth. So one suggestion right here would be that if you can cluster, only look at your emails at a certain time and turn the sound off so that you're not, hearing the ding and then having to look every time you hear that and decide whether you should pay attention to it or not. But anyway, sort of clustering what you're doing and not doing the other things at that time might be a way of reclaiming some of our time. And this is where it starts to really get interesting to me, because texting affects not only how we're communicating, but it affects what we communicate about. So we know, for instance, that people don't deal with the highly emotional things in a text message. If you can't express the emotion with a thumbs up or a smiley face or an emoji of some sort, then we tend not to deal with that in text. But the other thing is that we don't deal with the things that require a lot of typing. If it requires a lot of keyboarding for me to say it, or it's going to require a lot of that for you to respond to it, then we simply don't deal with those topics. So we're not talking about things that we would normally have talked about. And so our relationships, if we're doing all the texting, they tend to just be more surface kinds of relationships. And young people, more and more, that is how they are communicating. So the relationships are not maybe as deep as people who don't spend as much time texting. This gets to be a little frightening. There's quite a bit of research that shows that young people are not developing their empathy skills, their social skills, and their conversation skills because they're not having that interactive communication. It's more personal broadcasting. And employers are now concerned because they're saying that the new hires that they're getting don't have these skills, and they tend to want to avoid the face-to-face conversations. Which makes it more difficult to collaborate or to cooperate or just, to have a meeting and share information. I think another thing that's significant is that people want control over where their attention goes. So we're seeing more and more that the cell phone is the answer to boredom. You don't ever have to be bored again. If somebody that you're listening to is boring, you can just get your cell phone out and start surfing the web and find something that's more interesting than that person. But interesting thing, the effect that that's having is that our attention span is decreasing. We're down to about 6 minutes now. So college courses are using 6-minute long videos, and it's now only about 6 minutes between commercials on television, etc., because it's actually causing our brains to be rewired. And this just, I find astounding that the time spent with screens has increased to over 10 hours. So this is particularly for young people, that they are spending over 10 hours a day interacting with their screens, which means when you think about the time that's in a day, that doesn't leave a whole lot of time for anything else. And the other figure, the 74 times a day checking your email, that's adults at work that we check our emails 74 times per day, because there's almost something of an addictive effect with both of these, that you get when you get the text message or the email that you've been looking for, your brain secretes positive hormone. You get kind of a little high and a positive effect, and we get addicted to that. And we also think, if I just look it's kind of like the slot machine. If I just put one more dollar in, I'm going to get the jackpot. So if I look one more time at my email or my text messages, I'm going to get that important text message, or somebody's going to say something that I need to be aware of. And so what we're seeing is this propensity to multitask all the time, and we think that we are being more efficient and more productive with that. But what the research is now showing is that our performance degrades at everything when we multitask, and yet it gives us the feeling that we're more productive. So here's the disconnect, is that we feel that we're more productive, so we do more multitasking, which makes us less productive, and we just keep in that spiral. Also, frequent multitasking is associated with depression, anxiety, and even trouble reading human emotions. And then finally, where we put our attention shows not only how what we pay attention to, but what we will learn. But it also shows what we value. And I think, to me, that's the part where we get into trouble with the being less human, is that we're showing people that we don't value them.
I'm just pretty upset.
Okay, and then leads to the least emotional connection. So I think that's another thing that we need to be aware of, because we see people now doing things like sending a text message that says happy birthday, or posting on Facebook when someone has passed away, and you post your condolences and that sort of thing. And that's a much less emotional connection. You need to hear that voice, so that you hear the emotion in the person's voice. But also, it's when we see each other's faces and hear each other's voices that we become most human to each other. And in fact, that is how we teach people to love. When you start with a baby and you make eye contact with that baby, that's the beginning of teaching that baby to love, and also to acquire language. So if we're doing that less, if we're giving children something to watch so they can watch a cartoon while we're doing something, or you see that out at the restaurants all the time, where a family is out to dinner and the child has some sort of device that they are watching, and it's not participating in the conversation with the adults, who are also oftentimes on their cell phones doing something else. And then we have the issue of the edited self versus the real self, because now how we are perceived is coming through so much by what we tell people, and we're telling them, on our Facebook and what we post and so on. But we post things that will get liked. And it even has a little step behind that too, in that people will choose what they're going to do, so they can then take a picture of that and then post it, because they know that that's more likely to be liked. We also don't post the bad stuff or the unflattering selfies. So there's this whole piece of reality that we're not seeing about that person, because they're choosing not to share that with us. We say things to people online that we would never say face to face. And this was just shocking to me. CNN did a study recently of teenage communication, and they interviewed this one young woman, a teenager, and she said, I don't like to be with people face to face because I don't like to see them cry when I say mean things about them. Now, somehow it didn't occur to her not to say the mean things. She wanted to be able to say the mean things. She just didn't want to have to deal with the person crying when she said those mean things. So I think that's a problem. And another young man said he did not like to be face to face with people, because that was boring, to be face to face, having a face to face conversation with them. He liked to be online, or chatting with multiple people, because that was more interesting to him. This is interesting. People assess themselves by how many friends they have on Facebook, how many likes they get, and how many friends they have. And again, in this CNN study, one young woman reported that she had 3,000 friends. And they asked her if she knew all of those people, and she said, well, no, of course not. And they asked if her mother knew that she was sharing information with 3,000 people, some of whom she didn't know. So she may have lost some of her friends. And I just learned this recently, that Facebook manipulates your posts. So if you have, say, 200 friends, and they each put a post on every day, you don't necessarily see their posts. Facebook knows that you want to be happy when you're on Facebook. So they tend to boost the posts that are about happy things. So notice that you always find out when somebody's birthday is, even if you never get another post from them. The more likes it gets, the higher that gets boosted. So we're even somewhat manipulated by the information that we're getting from our friends. And I had no idea about this until fairly recently. So, I just think it's something that we need to be aware of. So let's stop again and see if people have any questions about whether we are becoming less human in our communication, or just if you have any questions about what I've mentioned so far. I'm not hearing any questions.
Lacey says that there is a great documentary called Generation Like, produced by PBS, that discusses the impact of social media and how millennials act. And I've seen that, and I also use it in my classes.
Okay. We'll add that to our list.
I got a meeting I work from.
Any other questions or comments? Laura, are you aware of any other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay.
Jenny Grouse talks about the Screenagers movie. That sounds interesting, Jenny.
Would she care to share about that? Okay.
Loran says, I know that it's not my problem, but how can you make someone else see the problem with technology? And in brackets, she has our parents.
Aha. Well, if she can hold that thought, I'm going to talk about that a little bit in just a few minutes. So I'm going to share some ideas for, going forward, what we need to do differently.
Sorry, Sheila, this is Jenny, and I apologize.
Yes.
I'm having a technological meltdown trying to keep up with seeing you, watching the slides, and occasionally putting something in a chat box. But the Screenagers film is about the effect of technology and screens on kids, and it's a specialized showing. It's an indie film, and you have to see it in groups, which I think goes to your statement about, breathe the same air. And I'll see if I can find the link and send it. I thought I actually got this reference from you, Sheila, but if it's not in your archives, I'll find it and send it.
Okay, great. That sounds like an interesting one to see. Yes, and I that's fascinating that you have to see it as a group. Yes.
Sheila, can you hear me now? This is Laura.
I can.
Oh, that's terrific, because I was muted there for a little while and I couldn't say anything. But I actually there was another comment by Jenny who suggested that research suggests that when people are talking on their cell phone and they can't hear well, they tend to talk more loudly. And so sometimes they can't hear well because they're distracted, because they're not really listening, which of course raises their voice as well. And then Carol Benton had a question for you. She said, Sheila says that folks don't do emotional content through text, but don't folks break up and have fights via text all of the time?
Probably, and isn't that inappropriate, that you're going to say the Dear John or Dear Mary through a text, but that's kind of, in my way of thinking, that's a little bit the cowardly way to do that. But, and actually, there are some, stories about people being willing to trust when they've never met the person. There was an article in Reader's Digest recently about a woman who was in her 50s and recently divorced and was doing very well. And she got on one of the dating services and met a gentleman who, long story short, she ended up sending him over $300,000. She never did meet him. And it turned out that it was, totally a scam, that the picture that he had posted was not who he really was. And, he was scamming. But it cost her $300,000. But she was willing to trust him enough over a period of time. And they had not even talked. It was all through texting, or emails, that sort of thing, pictures and so on. And he was not, pictures that he was sending were not even of him.
Yeah, Sheila, so now we've got perhaps, what do they call it? I'm playing devil's advocate here. Thomas Caden says, we've talked at length about negative effects of social media, but are there positive effects that foster deeper connections?
Well, certainly we know that people are connected to more people, and we are connected to people that we might normally not have been. For instance, classmates from high school or friends that you used to have, or my daughter and her husband were talking about a Facebook page that they had established for his family. And, I have conversations with them. I learned things about them that I never would have known had it not been for this Facebook page. There are some things. My concern is that we are replacing the face-to-face conversations with these different, we don't feel the urgency to, go down the hall and meet with somebody when we can just send them a text. Or you see those pictures like the one on the park bench earlier where the three people were sitting next to each other and they might have even been texting each other. which takes away some of their capability of communicating. And we see that, and we hear about that frequently with young people, that they might be in a group together and they are somewhat talking, but oftentimes they are texting other people who are not there in the group, and sometimes they're even texting the people who are sitting right across from them rather than having that conversation. But you hear the stories about people sitting on the couch next to each other watching the same program and texting each other rather than talking to each other. So, I think that's maybe where we're losing out, and also I think the other place is that we're not having those unplanned conversations with the people in the grocery line, or, that's on the commuter train with us, or that in the elevator, because people are so engrossed in their devices. And that's happening with families too. They're sitting at the dinner table and everybody's on their phone, and so they're not having the family conversations.
Sheila, Tom works.
Sheila? Oh.
Yes, Tom.
Just one
Sheila, this
added.
is Lori.
I've got a 15-year-old grandson who says everybody texts on the school bus. They don't communicate one another.
Oh, interesting. Well, maybe there's less bullying. I don't know. Maybe there's more bullying on the school bus, because I think that's a common place that some of that happens. But
Hello.
Okay.
yes. So in the interest of
Hello?
time,
Let's
I'm
pick it
going
up.
to move forward.
Hello.
I think that's good, Sheila.
You got
I
10
am
seconds.
going to mute everyone because it's getting
Okay.
really
Hello.
low. I'm going to mute
Yes.
everyone,
Can't
which
even do
will
your job.
mute
10
you
seconds
now.
is gone.
So here we go. And this is here now we have the takeaways. So what should we do about this? And I'm not recommending by any means that we should do away with the technology, because obviously we wouldn't be having this conversation if we did. But I think the first thing that we need to do is to value those relationships, to put more value on them, and to not only value them, but foster deeper relationships. So rather than having, the 3,000 friends on Facebook that we don't even know, it would be better to have those deeper relationships, with close friends and family members and so on. Because without that, we don't get the collaboration, we don't get the sharing. And I think the impact there is then we're not able to solve problems. I mean, we have some, global problems that are going to require some global conversations. And we're going to need to hear the feelings that are being expressed and the value that people put on the things that they're saying. And I think if you don't value the relationships, if you don't start with that, then you don't make any of the other changes. So we need to be in the same room with people. Breathing the same air matters for all those reasons that I cited earlier about, all the benefits of the other senses that we use when we communicate. So make a point to have more face-to-face conversations. And you want to hold those device-free family conversations, so dinners, etc. And by the way, it doesn't work if you say that your kids can't have their cell phones at the table, but you have yours, and because you say, well, my boss might call and I need to take this call, but their best friend, or anyway, it just doesn't set a good precedent or set a good role model for that. So you want to start by valuing the relationships. And I think the next thing is that we want to just listen more. So you might start by assessing your current listening habits. How are you communicating? Where are the situations that you are choosing to listen, and where are the situations that you're avoiding listening, perhaps? And then ask yourself, not only how is that working for you, but how is that working for the other person? And one thing beyond that, how is that working long term? So it might be expeditious to send that text right now because it gets it off of your plate and now it's somebody else's problem. But long term, it might have effects not only on the relationship, but the outcome of what's being communicated. I've seen studies that say that in a typical meeting, a business meeting, where you're doing an update on all of the projects, that there's typically only one other person listening, and it's the person who has to come next. So, only one person in the group is listening at a time, which means that any collaboration is going to be difficult because they weren't paying attention to what you said. And so, we all go away with only what we knew. Another thing I would say is, make sure that you're giving your undivided attention, particularly when the speaker is giving you signals to say this is a really important task. We want to rebuild that capacity to pay sustained attention, but also to show people that they matter to us. And then I think we have to recognize that speaking and listening with attention are skills. We can teach them, we can develop them, but they take practice. And that's, I think, where some of the big changes need to occur. Because if kids are spending 10 hours on their screens, they are not practicing their speaking and listening skills. So, you know, definitely they're going to come away with not the confidence to use those skills, and definitely not the skill set when they're needed. So I think that's one of the big ones, that we need to provide those opportunities and to value them, whether it's in teaching or in business or, you know, in your personal relationships. And then the last thing is we need to listen better. So not just create those device-free times, but those device-free places. So we're seeing businesses doing things like, I just heard on the news this morning that there are some businesses that are banning Friday afternoon meetings because, you know, people are distracted, they just want to leave. And the other places are having, you know, like email-free Thursday or that sort of thing. So they're having times when you have to go talk to the person so that you get those connections. We also want to make sure that we're using the right tool, not just because it's convenient, but because it's going to be the most effective way of communicating with that person, not just in the short term and not just for the accomplishing whatever the outcome is that we want, but also considering the relationship. Because if we haven't developed those relationships, then when it comes time that we need people to make those sacrifices or work harder or, you know, to care about each other, it's not there. And then the last thing I would suggest is to listen mindfully. Doctors sometimes use a technique that before they come into the examining room, they take 3 deep breaths, and when they touch the doorknob to come in, they clear their mind of everything that they just heard in the last case so that they are ready to listen mindfully to you. And that's certainly an important piece that we want in healthcare, but I think that applies also, you know, whether it's your child coming in to talk to you or a coworker coming in to talk to you, that sort of thing, that we need to clear our minds, you know, get rid of all that other stuff that's going on. Sometimes we have to, you know, move to a different location where there's not all the noise in the environment that causes the interruptions. And it says to the person, you have my undivided attention and I'm valuing what you're saying. And I'll close with just one last, I've got another little quote, but there was an article in this morning's paper how smartphone dependence can affect learning and health. And it gives several examples of how there's an adverse effect not only on people's health, like, you know, young people are not getting enough sleep. It says it is affecting their ability to learn because they're so distracted. They're not doing that deeper kind of processing that enables them to learn and remember what they're hearing in classes. But anyway, it's just this is written by a physician, by the way. It's, you know, a help column that's written by a physician. So let me share a quote that's out of Sherry Turkle's book. And let me see if I can get to it. It says, face-to-face conversation is the most human and humanizing thing we do. When we present to one another, we learn to listen. And I'm having trouble seeing this because it's covering it. Fully present to one another, we learn to listen. It's where we develop the capacity for empathy. It's where we experience the joy of being heard and of being understood. And that is definitely one reference that I found very useful. It's Sherry Turkle's new book, Reclaiming Conversation. And she has another one that's called Alone Together, where she talks a lot about how the impact of technology, how it's affecting our not only our communication processes, but the outcomes of those processes. So 2 last invitations to you. One, and get it to come up, is I'd like to invite you to participate in International Day of Listening. This is sponsored by the International Listening Association, and it's less than a week away. So the question is, have you heard? The whole world will be listening, and we're inviting you to be part of that conversation on International Day of Listening. It's next Thursday, and if you'd like a list of activities and events, you can go to the website for International Day of Listening at internationaldayoflistening.com. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter page, and what we're hoping is that we will get participation all over the world in some type of listening activity. It can be everything from something as simple as going for a listening walk to learning how to listen to people that you disagree with politically, or doing a free listening session. So there are lots of great ideas on there. And there's also lists of resources. If you go to the resources tab on the website, you'll find an annotated list of books. And there are some videos, some YouTube videos that are just excellent. So you might take a look at that. And one last invitation, and that is that if you're not already a member of the International Listening Association, we'd like to invite you to become a member. And Laura, do you want to share this one and talk about again the discount that they can get?
Well, can you hear me, Sheila?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Wasn't quite certain there. Yes, if you're not currently a member of ILA and you sign up within the next 24 hours to become a member, in the last email that you got, there was a code that you could use to receive $10 off your first membership for the first year, which is absolutely terrific. So we definitely hope that people participate in some of those things. Sheila, we've got some questions coming in on chat.
Yes. Okay.
Right now, because of the sound, when I unmute everyone, it gets to be really loud. So if you could send in your questions via chat right now, we can give them to Sheila, which would be terrific. Questions or comments, definitely. So I need to go over there. So Lori says that, Lori Jobert.
Hi, Lori.
I'm having a little bit difficulty now. Sheila, I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. Here we go. I'm better. Where did she go? Where did she go? Oh, Lori says, my office is focusing on the heart of listening for the International Day of Listening. We're in the Department of Cardiology at University of Washington. Catherine Black says, thank you, Sheila. This is very compelling as a mother, a wife, a friend, and a teacher. I will be having a face-to-face conversation with my husband about the points that you've made when we get up in the morning. Janice Newton says, can someone talk about how we might use this information in teaching at the university level?
Yes. And the thing I think that I would suggest about that is that the first step is like solving any problem is that we have to become aware of it. I mean, there were so many things when I started doing some research for this program, so many things that I was unaware of that I found really quite shocking how manipulated we are. You know, for instance, even the apps that we use on our phones and so on are designed to be addictive so that because they want you to spend more time on the app. It might be that you'll sell the app, you know, that you'll encourage someone else to purchase that app, or there might be other things that you have to spend additional money on for that app, but they are designed so that you will spend more time on them. And think about some of the apps that you're using and ask yourself whether, you know, what were you doing before you started using that app, and you know, which one is the best use of your time. So all the things that we're doing on technology are what hide things that we used to do that we're not doing anymore, and it might be that those had more value to them. So I think the first thing is to help people become aware of the changes, and you know, then if you're okay with the changes, okay, but if that's not the outcome that you want, then you want to change the behaviors.
Sheila, I have, I think, a perfect segue into being able to open up for people to ask questions. Jenny Grau had said that a previous ILA, or a current ILA member actually said that if we don't have rules about technology, then technology will rule us. So right now, I have taken control and muted everyone, but I can see from the questions and the comments coming on chat that people really want to be human and they really want to interact with you. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is mute yourself right now. I'm going to unmute everyone. And then if you have a question for Sheila, unmute yourself, identify yourself, and go ahead and ask Sheila a question. So I am unmuting everyone now. We are unmuted. Who would like to ask Sheila a question?
محاضرة في اللي هي المنظمة الجديدة بتاعت الاستماع الإنصات.
Jenna scheduled for 30 hours, I want to say, and it's all like 8 hours.
So some people didn't hear that.
Yes. Natalie Cook.
So many hours. She's like,
Natalie Cook.
You're the one that schedules it, but.
Is Lauren there?
Laura, when you unmute all of us, we have to take the direct action to mute ourselves again.
Right. That's what I just asked everyone to do.
Yep.
They may not all know how to do
I was
that.
going to say not everyone may know.
Okay.
So you may need to go back to muting everybody, and then
Yeah.
can
If you
they
go
do the
to
raise
the-
their hand thing?
For my shift that I worked at catering because it didn't allow me to pop in
Yes.
screening
Okay,
computers.
so let me go back to
Due
mute
the way,
everyone
so I didn't get
again.
paid for 8
Oh,
hours.
that's so
So
unfair.
Hi, Natalie.
Hello, or person. Okay, so chat again then. Loran said, I think that maybe the reason that more people are being catfished nowadays is because like you said, we are becoming less emotional through face-to-face interactions. This also helps answer the question, why do people get catfished? People are just wanting that person to be there for them on an emotional level and not a physical level. I think that this is why there's an increase in people being catfished due to the less of the desire of that personal connection. Sheila, do you agree with that or not?
Well, maybe I can answer this from a slightly different perspective. I think that so much of what's going on in our culture, and I think this is sort of a global thing, has put the emphasis on us, that we're more self-centered, maybe is the comment. But, when you look at people's posts on Facebook or their texts or that sort of thing, it is a type of personal broadcasting. So I think more and more we are taught to not to pay more attention to our own needs. What do I want? Go for it. Don't let anybody get in your way, that sort of thing. But so I think that we need to have some balance, that the other person matters as well. And I have to say, I'm not familiar with the term catfish. I'm in the Memphis area, and you go out for catfish. So.
Sheila, catfishing is when it was the example that you've given before, when the man developed an intimate relationship with somebody via text, and so they pretend to be somebody that they're not. I'm feeling pretty good that I could explain what that was, and I hope that I explained that right. David Boderi just identified to me that I might be able to unmute people when they have questions. So let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Lauren, so I've got to find Lauren on here because she definitely had a question for you. Lauren, I think I've unmuted you. Are you there? I have unmuted her, but she is not there. Who else would like to ask Sheila a question? I will try to unmute you too. Jenny Grau, I see. So let me see if I can find Jenny.
Could I just chip in and make a comment?
Yes, somebody there. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, can you see me? I've just put the video on. Yeah, I'm speaking from England, from the UK, and I have just found I can unmute myself when you have muted me. So there's actually, everybody can just unmute them when needed, and you can mute everybody. But I have also written a comment here to say that I find the challenges of this call, people being completely unaware that they were on display and their sounds were interfering with the whole call.
Right.
Illustrating what this talk was about.
Yes.
I mean, it couldn't be better. I mean, if this is the International Listening Association and we can't get our heads around what that is, and actually when you look behind the scenes, this is how much multitasking is going on, or how much this becomes a background.
Yes.
And that's very interesting. I think there is a lot to be said, or there's an important question to me, is how can we develop the awareness of what's going on and the awareness of listening, and then how can we interest others in that?
Well, if you can answer that question, you have hit pay dirt, because that's something that in the International Listening Association that we have explored for years. We've said it doesn't have the same sex appeal as talking. Listening is what people think of it as not being in the power position, and yet you are, because as we've seen illustrated, that I might be talking, but if people aren't listening, I have absolutely no power. So again, I think helping people to understand the real process. But I also think that, sometimes when the technology comes out, we need to establish some rules up front before the problems develop. In my consulting business, I had to deal with that a number of times. They would bring me in as a consultant to help them establish rules for their meetings that would be things like, don't bring your technology in. We have to go back to taking notes by hand, because once one person brings it in, then everybody wants to bring it in, and then we end up doing things that are not related to the meeting, etc. So, I think maybe establishing rules, guidelines, and people are doing that more and more. They'll have a box now that you have to put your cell phone in when you go into the meeting. So maybe those are some suggestions. And just, I noticed that we've come up on the past the magic 11 o'clock hour. So, Laura, I don't know how you want to address that. I'm happy to take questions. They can email them to me if they'd like to, or to, to the website, to the webinar site, and I'd be happy to answer those questions. But I think we want to be mindful of people's time.
Yeah, and I think that's...
I'd like to say thank you for attending.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank everyone for attending. And like Sheila said, Sheila's willing to stay on a little bit longer to answer questions. So if you'd like to stay, you can definitely stay and unmute yourself and ask her question. For people who do have to go, we very much appreciate your time. And if you would like to send Sheila a question, actually, if you go to the ILA website, there is, and I believe it might only be in the members only area, the place to list questions and have a discussion. And so Sheila can check that routinely for the next few days and perhaps get a discussion.
But can't they also respond to somebody through the ILA webinar? They got an email. Can they not respond back to somebody through the ILA webinar?
I think that all goes to info@ILA. So if they'd like,
then maybe she could forward them to
that,
me.
Nan our executive director could send those to you.
Okay.
Yes. So goodbye to those of you who have to leave. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Everyone else, if you'd like to unmute yourself and talk with Sheila, feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you at some other ILA events, and hope that you will participate in International Day of Listening to help us value listening. Thank you.
Sheila, I just wanted to say thank you. This was a wonderful program. The slides were incredible. I'm sorry that the first part of it didn't get recorded, because I think there are people who have a cross-section interest, as you do, in animals, and people who would have found the introduction fascinating. And so I don't know, I guess I'll just make a request, since we had some technical difficulties through the webinar. If you were willing, if there were time, if there were technology, to simply do a run-through of this without our interruptions, this would be a fabulous thing to post on the ILA website and keep in perpetuity.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question about the research that has been done into listening. When we talked about when you shared what you do, what you are asked to do when you come in as a consultant. For me, the key question is listening is to me an activity from within, and rules are things that we install from outside, so to speak. And any teacher, of course, will have this issue: how do I involve my students in listening? How do I engage them? And the fact is, we can't engage them; they have to engage.
Right. And, that's another one of the age-old questions, because oddly enough, the people who come to something like this are not the ones who need the listening instruction. They're interested, they value listening. The people who really need it are the ones that never show up. I mean, I've found that throughout my career, that, the people who come to a listening seminar value listening, and they're pretty good at it already. It's getting those other people to come that is an issue. But, I think if we value it and show that it is an important piece of not only things like leadership, but being part of a team and in relationships and so on, that we can continue to promote it as a, something that not only should we value, but that people need to learn how to do it better.
Sheila, Janice Newton requests that you talk a little bit more about what teachers might do in a classroom to enhance this.
Sheila? I actually
Yes.
found out how to unmute myself. I
Hi.
can ask the question myself.
Okay, thank you,
I
Janet.
do a lot of strategies around listening with my students, and I have
Mhm.
banned technology. I sort of told some students can use their computers, but off to one side. What I'm struck with, and I think you hit on something very important, the extent to which technology gives positive endorphin stuff while they're using it.
Mhm.
It creates a huge resistance on the part of students to actually believing anything that you just said. They don't believe it. When you tell them, I give them research papers, they don't believe a word of it. And the resistance level in the university classroom, to me, is just staggering. So creating a classroom context where students, you know, I'm kind of feeling like pulling my hair out because I don't know how to convey to students or how to structure the classroom. You talk about creating rules. Well, I create rules. They ignore them flagrantly. And I just, does anyone have wisdom on this? Of how we can create university classrooms that are more conducive to listening, and in particular around technology?
I have one idea for you, Janice. Because when you said that, you know, I give them research papers and they don't believe me, and I tell them the facts and they don't believe me, and I find that to be true with my students as well. There's something about us as professors or instructors or teachers not being believed. I guess we're doing that because we can't do, you know, out in the real world, so to speak. So one of the assignments that I actually have my students do is they go out and they interview someone in the field that they want to go into, and I require them to ask questions about communication. And it's really interesting because students will come back to me and say, oh, Dr. J, you don't understand how important listening is in nursing. And of course I have to go, no, I don't. Please tell me. So if you maybe have them go out and talk to other people who are not, you know, teachers in the classroom, and give them just a few questions to ask, it might be interesting to have them come back to the responses, because perhaps they'll believe that outside authority a little bit more than the authority within inside the classroom.
That's fantastic, Laura, and especially that's
And I would just,
adaptable
I'm sorry,
to any discipline.
And I might add one other thing. You know, when they have said to you that they want to be able to bring their technology into the classroom, how they would react if you didn't listen to that. You know, you can respond to it, but what if you refuse to listen to it or refuse to hear their reasons for why they think that it's a, you know, a positive thing? But I think if you can also present them with the fact that not only does it affect their behavior, but it affects the people around them. They've done studies in medical classes, you know, medical school classes, where they find that, you know, here are medical students and they're, you know, shopping online while they're in their medical classes. But so the person next to them is distracted and also then starts thinking like, oh, well, maybe I should be doing that too. So, and I don't know, maybe you have to go to the university level and ask for some rules at the university level. I think you're dealing with a tremendous challenge because people are so really addicted to being connected and thinking that you know, they have to know what's being said right now. But maybe try it as an experiment and then ask how they felt about, you know, what happened. You know, ask them to do it as an experiment.
Yeah,
that
I've tried that. And the other dimension of the challenge is if a student comes in with a disability that requires them to use a computer, we can't out them by saying, okay, you can do it, but nobody else. So it's a real challenge how to, you know, do this with all of the parameters that we have to work under.
Yeah. Janice, it is definitely a challenge. I have a question from Ahmed Youssef, who said, I would like to ask if there is a ready-made questionnaire to test the quality of listening among better teachers and students, or among teachers and students. And Ahmed, though I can't give you a questionnaire right off the top of my head, I can tell you that you are in great luck, because the next webinar that we do is going to be with Graham Bodie and Deborah Worthington, who have just edited a listening instrument resource measures book. And so the entire book will have probably well over 100 listening instruments, I believe, that were critiqued by different people. So there might be something in that book that you would be able to use. Additionally, if you go onto the resources part of the International Listening Association website, there are listening instruments that are listed there that have gone under a little bit of a review. So you might be able to find something there that would be useful to you as well.
And Graham and Deborah are both highly regarded professors. So I think you'll find that they will have a lot of good insight to that.
Yusuf, I don't have the name of the book yet, but you will find it with the advertising for the final webinar that we do for 2016. It will be in November or December, so just keep your eye out at the International Listening Association website or wherever you heard about today's webinar. Are there any other questions? Phil, are you back on? Phil?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Phil, actually, I have an 11:30 that I have to go to, so if you might make yourself co-host instead of me, so I can...
You can do that. You have the permission to do that since your co-host or Sheila is.
How do I do that?
If you go to the options on the top of your screen, says you're viewing Sheila Bentley's screen, put on options, and you could put exit full screen.
Laura and Phil, how about if I suggest that we go ahead and close out the seminar and the program, and if people have other questions, they can get in touch with me. I'll be happy to give them my email address if they'd like.
And I also would be very willing to give us another platform to do this, to record this at length, or do another one, an encore.
Yeah, that might be really good, Phil, because we did miss that first part, and then we had parts that had a lot of, feedback on it.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. Well, there are 15 participants still online. Sheila, if you could provide your email address to them, that might be terrific.
I'm going to give you my ancient one, and my kids both make fun of me that I still have an AOL email address, but it is Bentley SC, so it's Bentley, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie, at AOL.com. Again, BentleySC@AOL.com, and I'll be happy to take your questions. And I just, again, want to say thank you so much for attending our webinar, and just appreciate your interest. It's good to know that there are people all over the world who are interested in listening.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sheila. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Sheila. One last call. I couldn't catch your email. I couldn't get it. Is
Bentley,
Ley.
S as in Sam, C as in Charlie.
S in Sam, C in Charlie.
At AOL.com.
At AOL.com.
Yes.
BentleySC@AOL.com.
Yes, thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. Sorry, that was a bit slow. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Terrific.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Laura. Talk to you later.
Everybody can exit by just clicking on Leave Meeting.